Welcome back to the deep dive. There are places in the world that are more than just coordinates on a map. They're like condensed cultural histories.
Yeah, they become these living palimpsests where layer after layer of human activity, human need, and, human desire have been written over time.
Exactly. And today we are diving into one of the most remarkable and I think historically rich urban spaces anywhere, Shinjuku Ni-chome.
It is a truly unique spot. I mean, when you look at it on a map, it's tiny. A mere 105,000 square meters, which is basically two small blocks crammed against major transport arteries in Tokyo.
Geographically, it's almost insignificant.
Right. But culturally, it's gigantic. It's got this complex mix of everyday life, offices, apartments, but it's globally famous as, well, the world's most concentrated gay town.
And that's the central tension we're really unpacking today. When someone says Nisho now, they immediately think of LGBTQ plus culture, right? Centered on Nakaduri Street with something like 450 gay bars and related businesses.
It's an incredible number, and it feels like this permanent, fixed part of modern Tokyo's identity.
But it's not.
Not at all. That association is startlingly modern. And so your mission, as you listen today, is to understand the deep evolution of this district. We're going to trace its 300-year history, starting long before any concept of modern LGBTQ identity even existed.
So the question is, how does a historical rest stop for travelers? How does that morph into a global epicenter for sexual minority culture?
And the answer, as the sources reveal, is that Ni-chome has always been defined by desire. It's just that the form of that desire has radically, fundamentally shifted over time.
So we have to recognize that for most of its existence, Ni-chome meant something entirely different. It was a place for heterosexual commerce and convenience. So let's unpack this from the very beginning, the origins of Shinjuku itself.
Right. The genesis of the district is rooted in pure logistics. It was a classic Edo period bureaucratic problem. You had the Nihonbashi Bridge, which was the official starting point of all the major highways. If you were traveling the Kushu-Kaido, the road heading west, the distance to the very first official post station to Kaido-juku was a huge problem.
And we're talking about 4 ri. For anyone listening who isn't familiar with Edo-era measurement, a ri is roughly 4 kilometers.
So that's 16 kilometers, about 10 miles.
That's a grueling first leg of a journey.
Yeah.
If you're walking, especially in summer or winter, that's just exhausting. The government basically created this dead zone between rest stops.
Precisely. So necessity is the mother of invention, and in this case, also the mother of desire. To solve the problem of traveler exhaustion and, to capitalize on the commerce, an unofficial station started to form.
And this was way back.
Way back. Starting around 1625, townhouses began popping up near the Taisuji Temple.
And this informal settlement eventually caught the eye of the shogunate.
It did. In 1698, the government formally recognized the area and sanctioned it as a new post station. They named it Naduchu Shinjuku.
And the name itself is the first historical clue, right?
It is. It was built on the former estate of the Naichu family, who are these high-ranking lords of the Takatu domain, and Shinjuku just means new post station.
So it became one of the Edo Shishuku, the 4 post stations of Edo. And while its primary function was commercial, facilitating travel and trade,
the sources make it crystal clear that its secondary function, providing pleasure, was just as central from day one.
Built into its DNA.
Absolutely. Naichu Shinjuku was immediately characterized as an iromachi, a pleasure quarter. This wasn't something that happened decades later. It was there from the start. We have concrete evidence of this.
Let's look at that evidence, because the town had a brief but disruptive moment in the early 18th century.
It did. The sources show the town was actually abolished in 1718 during the Kyushu reforms. The Tokugawa shogunate, basically under the guise of moral reasons, shut it down.
Too much illicit activity.
Yeah, the concentration of it had just become too great. But this brings up a fascinating point. The government tried to suppress desire, but desire always finds a way, especially when it's commercially viable.
And it did find a way back.
It took 55 years of concerted petitioning by the local town headmen, the business owners who'd lost their livelihoods. But Naichu Shinjuku was successfully reestablished in 1772.
And the regulatory records from that reestablishment, they're really illuminating.
Oh, they tell you everything. They show exactly what the government was sanctioning. They permitted 52 inns and 150 meshimori ana.
Okay, that's a key piece of jargon we need to unpack. Meshimori, literally rice-serving women. That's a very polite euphemism that hides the reality.
A very polite one, yes. They were essentially licensed prostitutes working in the inns. The ratio alone, almost 3 prostitutes for every single inn, tells you this was not just a place to sleep. It was a major, government-regulated sex economy serving travelers and local pleasure seekers alike.
And this 18th century structure of regulated desire, it really sets the stage for everything that followed.
It does.
And it's not just dry history either. This past is woven into Japanese literature, which gives us incredible sensory detail about the place. We have one of the most famous literary figures of the Meiji period, Natsume Soseki, living right in this environment.
Soseki's connection is so intimate and profound. He was adopted by the local town headman, Shiobara Masunosuke, and he lived directly in the area that later became Ni-chome. At one point, he lived in a brothel, a kiru, called Izubashi, right in the old Naitu Shinjuku Nakachu.
He wasn't just observing, he was internalizing the whole atmosphere of this specific block.
And he wrote about it specifically in his autobiographical novel, Michikusa, or Grass on the Wayside. He even described climbing the famous bronze Jizo statue located at Taisuji Temple nearby.
Wow.
That detail lets you mentally map the geography of commerce and pleasure from the 19th century right onto the contemporary Ni-chome.
So as Japan transitions from the Edo shogunate to the Meiji government, the nature of the pleasure quarter stays constant, even if the rules change.
Correct. The Meiji period just formalized the inns into kashizashiki rented rooms for prostitutes. By 1873, there were over 50 of these places, stretching across Shinjuku 1-kome to 3-kome.
And initially, they used this controversial practice of harimis.
Yeah, where the women were put on display in storefronts, but the police eventually banned that and forced them to use photographs instead. But this decentralization, the pleasure quarter being spread over a wide area, that's really important.
Because it sets the stage for the critical geographic shift that determines the entire future of Ni-chome.
The Great Relocation of 1918.
A literal decree from the Tokyo Metropolitan Police.
Yep. They ordered all those scattered kashizashiki from 1-kome, 2-kome, and the 3-kome to consolidate into one single centralized area, the northwest corner of the old Shinjuku Ni-chome.
This was the moment the pleasure industry became fully concentrated in the blocks we now call Ni-chome.
And here's where it gets really interesting, where you have this connection between high literature and low culture. The land they moved to wasn't some empty lot. It was formerly known as Ushiagahara, the Shinjuku Ranch.
And the owner of that ranch, Shinbara Tushu, is famous for a completely different reason.
He was the real biological father of the literary titan Rinosuke Akutagawa.
Wait. The man who gave us Rashomon, one of the most complex, psychologically dark authors in Japanese history, was the son of the ranch owner, whose land was then sold and developed into Tokyo's newest centralized pleasure district.
It's an unbelievable confluence of history and literature on this one specific piece of earth.
That's incredible.
It speaks to the fluidity of Shinjuku. Tushu ran the ranch from 1888 to 1913. When the land was sold in 1918, it immediately paved the way for the brothels to relocate, ushering in the formalized Shinjuku Yukaku and starting the next phase of this area's story of desire.
So part 2 kicks off with the creation of the Shinjuku Yukaku, the licensed formalized pleasure quarter. The relocation took a few years. It was completed around 1921. But almost immediately, the new area faced that cyclical destruction that just seems to define this part of Tokyo.
It's a pattern of destruction and rebirth. No sooner was the Yukaku relocated and built than a massive fire in March 1921 burned it to the ground.
Unbelievable.
They had to rebuild everything, including planning out the road infrastructure, which is what established the shape of Nakaduri Street as we know it today.
Incredible resilience. But then history gave them a very unexpected gift, a devastating natural disaster that ironically cemented their regional success.
The Great Kanto earthquake of 1923. Major established rival pleasure quarters, places like Yoshiwara and Suzaki, were absolutely flattened. They were effectively destroyed by the fires.
But Shinjuku Yukaku,
being relatively new and better planned, it was largely spared.
Which meant that while Tokyo's demand for pleasure remained, the supply was suddenly all centered in Shinjuku.
Exactly. And this led directly to the Yukaku's golden age. Tokyo's population was expanding rapidly westward, and you have the rise of the salaryman class, which created this massive new clientele.
Right.
Shinjuku Yukaku established itself as a modern Yukaku, catering to this growing middle and intellectual class. During the Taishu and early Sho eras, if you said Ni-chome, there was no ambiguity at all. You meant the Shinjuku Yukaku, the epicenter of licensed commercial heterosexual desire.
But once again, war intervened.
It did. The yukaku was destroyed a second time in 1945 during the devastating air raids. The whole area was just scorched earth. And then came GHQ, the general headquarters of the Allied powers, and the radical legal shift in 1946 when they abolished public prostitution.
But this abolition didn't kill the industry. It just forced it to evolve into a legal gray zone.
Right. The need for the service didn't vanish, but the legal framework did.
So what happened?
It's a fantastic example of commercial adaptation. The area survived as a recognized Akasen district, the Red Line area, and they relied on this ingenious legal loophole. Businesses operated as tokushu in Shikuten.
Special eating and drinking establishments. Cafes, basically.
Cafes, exactly. And this sounds like the setup for a great legal drama.
So what was the specific legal fiction they were using?
The fiction was that the establishment itself only provided the space, the rented room, and any sex acts that took place were legally defined as private acts of free love between the customer and the woman.
So the business was just a landlord and a cafe owner, not a pimp.
That's the argument. The ultimate legal sidestep that allowed the culture of desire to continue, shielded by this ambiguity.
And it worked.
It allowed the Red Line to thrive for another decade. The core Akasen area was smaller than the old yukaku, condensed into roughly 100 meters square in the northwest of Ni-chome, housing about 100 cafes.
And the clientele.
Primarily salarymen and students. And this post-war atmosphere of, sexual chaos and legal ambiguity left a huge cultural footprint.
You see it in the literature of the time.
Absolutely. Think of Junosuke Yoshiyuki's Shu, Sudden Shower, or Hiroyuki Itsuki's Sesshin Nonbon, Gate of Youth. These novels just capture that atmosphere of moral compromise and youthful energy that defined the Akasen era. The area was notorious, yet essential to Tokyo's post-war life.
So we had this thriving semi-legal district. What was the final decisive blow that finally extinguished this centuries-old tradition?
The full enforcement of the prostitution prevention law. It was gradually rolled out, but its complete enforcement came in 1958, Shuhwa 33.
And that was it?
That was the end. The law permanently closed down the Akasen. The old pleasure quarter, the one that had existed in some form since the 17th century, ceased to exist as a tolerated or sanctioned zone.
And crucially, this didn't just close businesses. It created a literal physical void. A sudden, jarring vacuum of empty houses, closed shops, and desolate streets in the heart of Shinjuku.
And that vacuum is the essential catalyst for the most radical transformation of all.
Right. So if we look back at our theme of desire, part 3 is this profound inversion.
It is. The government successfully suppresses state-sanctioned commercial heterosexual desire in 1958, and in the resulting desolation, a different, heavily tabooed form of desire was allowed to flourish.
That's a beautiful way to put it.
Yeah.
The area lost its official vitality, its prestige. It was instantly seen by the general public as out of bounds, a ghost town where no one wanted to linger.
That desolation, that anonymity was the perfect cover. Sexual minorities who were heavily tabooed and often criminalized at the time desperately needed discretion and a physical sanctuary.
And an abandoned, slightly notorious block of empty properties was ideal.
Exactly.
But that begs the crucial question. Tokyo's huge. Lots of neighborhoods had empty properties post-war. Why did the concentration of the homosexual community happen here? Why Shinjuku Ni-chome and not, say, parts of Ginza or Shibuya?
That's where the analysis comes in, and the sources offer two key arguments. One group of historians points to the pre-existing infrastructure of desire, the high number of cruising spots, the Hattenba, already thriving around the greater Shinjuku area.
And what were those?
Places like Gondambara and Jingugain, Ueno Park, and certain movie theaters, particularly the old Nikatsu Magaza, which is where the Shinjuku Marui stands today. These were established cruising zones.
So there was already a dense potential customer base clustered in the area.
A huge pre-made magnet. The community was already gathering locally, and the 1958 closure basically provided a physical clubhouse right in the middle of their operational territory.
That makes sense.
But if we connect this to the bigger picture, it's about the very nature of Shinjuku itself. It was, and still is, a massive, transient, fluid community. It has always been distinct from the traditional, close-knit local communities of Old Tokyo.
Right.
This inherent fluidity made the area naturally more accepting of sexual difference, of counterculture, of people seeking to just shed their daytime identities, a place where you could disappear into the crowd.
So let's talk about the specific pioneers. The movement didn't start in Ni-chome proper, but it migrated here.
That's right. The first post-war bar mentioned is Yanagi in Shinbashi in 1945. Then yakyoku, or night music, opened in the general Shinjuku area. But the true prototype for the Ni-chome gay bar emerged in 1951, a place called Ibsen.
Ibsen, and that was located in the Yunmachi area, part of the old Ni-chome. What made it the prototype?
It started as a coffee shop, but it quickly gained this notoriety through hushed word of mouth as a male love izakaya. And crucially, it provided a designated indoor space for men to socialize and seek relationships, moving beyond the risks of cruising in parks.
The need for secrecy was intense. I remembered an anecdote in the sources about the customers leaving.
Yes, the level of social taboo was so high that an account describes the bar staff having to step outside first to actively check the street to make sure that the customer wouldn't be seen by outsiders exiting a known homosexual venue.
Wow. That fear dictated the whole early culture.
It did.
So how does this nascent culture take over the physical geography of the former Akasen? This is where the real estate game comes in, right?
The 1958 closure created the opportunity. Aggressive real estate acquisition sealed the deal. And the key pioneer here was a man named Maeda Mitsuyasu, the owner of an early bar called Lanya.
And Maeda wasn't just running a bar.
No, he saw a market and a real estate vacuum at the same time. He acted quickly and decisively, actively buying up the newly empty properties, especially around Fududuri, which runs perpendicular to Nakadiri.
And what's really fascinating is how he populated those properties.
Yes, Maeda was from Okinawa, or Amami Island, so he leveraged his existing network, calling on family members, friends, fellow islanders to move to the newly acquired real estate and set up businesses.
This explains that specific, lasting cultural footprint we still see today.
It's a direct historical thread. When you walk through Ni-chome today and you see all the Okinawan and Amami cuisine restaurants, it's not a coincidence. It's the physical culinary legacy of the founding gay entrepreneurs who bought up the vacated Akasen properties.
So it wasn't just bars. It was the creation of a supportive economic ecosystem built on kinship.
And the final geographic stamp came in the late 1960s. The bars in the Chidori-gai area, which was closer to Shinjuku-gyan, were forced to relocate because of urban reorganization.
And they didn't just scatter.
No, they migrated en masse to the newly established Shinchidori-gai complex, located squarely on Nakadutri Street.
That mass migration solidified the identity.
So the combination of pioneers like Ibsen and Lanya, Maeda's deliberate real estate moves, and the relocation of the Chidori-gai bars meant that the modern gay town emerged with lightning speed from the mid-60s onward, right onto the specific geography of the former pleasure district.
The speed is incredible.
By 1966, the concentration was explosive. Some sources claim there were already 80 gay bars. By 1969, a national guide called Green Letter recognized Ni-chome as the designated gay town of Japan.
In just over a decade.
The core desire driving those two blocks had completely flipped.
And during this quiet revolution, the area showed its unique Shinjuku character, that capacity for mongrelization and inclusion.
The sources point to spaces like the famous literary bar Naja, which opened in the mid-60s. This was a high-culture hub where writers debated politics and art. But it successfully integrated gay staff and clientele, operating as a gay bar at the same time.
It shows that Shinjuku's countercultural vibe wasn't limited to one identity. It was a tolerance for all difference.
Exactly.
And we also have to talk about the parallel development of lesbian space. The narrative so often focuses on the male scene, but women were also finding their sanctuary here.
Absolutely. The lesbian scene developed its own nexus, an L-shaped alley known as Yuri no Komichi, Lily's Path, or Elduri, L Road. This alley grew from just a few bars to around 30, forming a distinctive hub for women.
And the location itself is tied to that history, right? Running over the culvert of a small river.
A river that originated in Taisuji's pond. So, just as the ranch land shaped the male quarter, the hidden water systems of the city helped define the hidden female quarter.
The geography has always been deterministic. This space, born of commercial necessity and defined by layers of clandestine desire, was ready for its national moment.
It was.
As we enter the 1970s, Ni-chome stops being just a local sanctuary and it becomes a national destination. And the primary vehicle for this wasn't television or radio yet. It was print, the gay magazine explosion.
This was a lifeline. Barazoku, the Rose Tribe, launched in 1971. It was Japan's first commercial gay magazine. And then publications like Adon, Sabu, and Samson followed quickly, creating this whole media ecosystem for the community.
And these magazines' business model was fundamentally tied to Ni-chome.
Precisely. They were filled, often a third of the total pages, with advertisements for the bars, the adult shops, the video makers in Ni-chome. For a gay man living in a smaller town, these magazines were essentially a client enlightenment journal.
They were a map.
They were a map instructing them exactly where to go. They cemented the idea that if you were gay, Nicho was the only place in Japan where you could truly be visible and connected.
That creates such a powerful feedback loop. The magazines promote the district, which provides revenue and customers, which allows the district to grow, which makes the magazines even more necessary.
But despite this vibrant cultural growth happening inside the bars, the street atmosphere remained intensely discreet well into the 1980s.
Right. People were described as walking in a scuttle.
Yeah, moving quickly from door to door, not lingering, constantly checking over their shoulders to make sure no colleagues or family members recognize them exiting a known gay venue. The outside world was still dangerous.
But inside those walls, it was the era of the gay discos, and they were electrifying.
Yes, the 70s and 80s were defined by these clubs. New Sazi opened in 1966. It was an early fixture, and according to some sources, it even attracted international rock stars like Freddie Mercury.
That detail alone speaks volumes about the district's global reputation, even back then.
Then you had clubs like Black Box and the Q Flat building. This was a truly progressive, avant-garde space. It attracted this diverse mix: gay men, foreign models, punk youth. It was a cultural intersection.
And they charged men less for admission than women.
A rare reversal of typical Tokyo club pricing. And then there was the dominance of Mako. That name is synonymous with the late 70s explosion of youth culture in Ni-chome.
Mako was a phenomenon.
It opened in this small building, and it was the first venue to successfully attract huge numbers of young gay men. So many that people would overflow onto the staircase and the street. Its fame was such that it was featured in international gay guides like Spartacus, further enhancing Ni-chome's global reach.
And the history of these discos holds an important lesson about the function of a queer space.
It's the irony of success. The sources note this recurring pattern. These successful gay discos almost inevitably declined and failed when they became too popular with straight women.
The core clientele felt the atmosphere was compromised.
Yeah, when their sanctuary became just another trendy spot, they left and the venue collapsed. The successful preservation of the space required a certain exclusivity.
That speaks to the fragility of the sanctuary. But the 1980s also featured places that were anarchic, boundary-pushing, almost performance art in their raw sexuality.
This is the deep and dangerous period. It represents the raw, uncensored energy of a marginalized community. The sources mention the now largely forgotten show pub, Kintama Rai.
Which translates chillingly to Golden Ball Cemetery.
A deliberately provocative name. It was a space of anarchy, defiance, and extreme performance. Before widespread visibility, these venues provided an outlet for the community's sexual energy and a spectacle for both gay men and curious straight clientele.
So what happened there?
It featured young male staff performing truly shocking, boundary-pushing feats, often with theatrical nicknames like E.T., Shinjuku Pan, or Musasabi. This wasn't just commercial sex, it was a defiant physical expression of tabooed identity that transcended the typical bar scene.
It contrasts so sharply with the highly discreet behavior required on the street. It's like the cultural pressure cooker had a spectacular vent.
That tension, public invisibility versus explosive internal creativity defined the era, but things began to shift rapidly with the gay boom starting in the late 80s.
Invisibility was suddenly forced into the mainstream.
Exactly. Exposure exploded starting in 1988 with Fuji TV's show Mr. Lady and Mr. Temakin no Wa and the growing celebrity of media gays. This was followed by a flood of articles in major mainstream magazines in the early 90s proclaiming a gay renaissance.
The secret was out.
But the single biggest cultural shock, the moment that defined the new visibility, was the 1993 TV drama Juchikai, The Class Reunion.
That was a cultural earthquake. A primetime national TV drama featuring dramatic, explicit depictions of gay romance.
And the impact on Ni-chome itself was legendary. The sources report that the streets of Ni-chome were momentarily deserted as patrons rushed home or to bars with TVs to watch the show.
That immediate impact tells you everything about the community's desperate craving for visible, empathetic representation after decades of secrecy. It was a moment of communal identification.
And this growing visibility coincided with a major evolution in how the community found each other. Cruising began to fundamentally change. The function of the physical gathering space had to adapt.
The cruising spots moved indoors, into the heart of the gay town itself.
Yes, the risky external public spaces, the parks, The public movie theaters were slowly abandoned in favor of safer, specialized indoor venues opening up within Ni-chome.
Ah,
We see the rise of video boxes and cruising facilities like Amstrip and Paragon in the early 90s.
a deliberate move from external danger to internally controlled specialized facilities.
Right. And finally, the sheer scale of the community grew so large that Ni-chome couldn't contain its gatherings anymore.
In New York model, the large-scale gay night.
It became essential. This culture shifted the size of community gatherings from dozens to hundreds or even thousands. The massive club Gold-D in Shibara, for instance, became famous for these huge gay nights. The sources even note that Gold-D ran bus services directly from Ni-chome to ferry the massive crowds.
So Ni-chome became the anchor, the point of origin, but the community had outgrown the geography. And that change in spatial necessity, driven by visibility and increasing scale, really sets the stage for the crisis the district faces today.
And that's where we arrive, at the current dilemma, the paradox of acceptance. This is the central crisis facing Ni-chome.
Right.
As societal discrimination, homophobia has decreased, the unique, urgent necessity of having a dedicated, physically segregated gay space has also diminished.
It's the ultimate consequence of success. Why pay high Shinjuku rents to operate a space when your clientele no longer needs a sanctuary?
Exactly. Gay individuals can now meet and socialize in ordinary bars without fearing exposure, or, and this is the more critical factor, they are relying entirely on digital platforms.
The digital shift has fundamentally severed the primary function of the bar.
That explosive sexual and social energy, the desire for meeting and connection that created the physical Ni-chome space in the first place, has largely migrated to apps. The bar is no longer the indispensable primary meeting spot.
And that makes it incredibly difficult for single-sex establishments which rely on that steady flow of customers to survive. The economic pressure from technology is immense.
And if technology wasn't enough, the physical geography of Ni-chome is now facing existential economic warfare in the form of gentrification.
This is a textbook case. Infrastructure improvement causing economic displacement.
The 2008 opening of the Fukutoshin subway line caused a mini-bubble around the Shinjuku Sanchome station. This immediately resulted in soaring land prices and prohibitive rents.
And the unique architecture of Ni-chome, those dense, low-rise buildings, is structurally and economically vulnerable.
They're ideal targets for redevelopment. The area has seen increased commercial and office development, high-rise buildings, threatening the existing low-rise, intimate structure and unique atmosphere.
And older, smaller bars are closing.
Yes, gay and lesbian bars, which operate on incredibly thin margins, are closing due to economic hardship. This economic crisis is compounded by the declining foot traffic driven by the digital shift.
So survival often means diluting the very identity that made the district unique.
The sources confirm this. To fill revenue gaps, many bars have converted into kankyu bar tourist bars or mixed bars, welcoming straight customers. But this creates a negative spiral called touristification.
Which is?
The more accessible the area becomes to outsiders, the more the core gay community feels displaced and leaves, which further erodes the neighborhood's distinctiveness.
This shift has also created community conflict and an ethical dilemma regarding the influx of straight clientele, particularly women.
There are widely reported instances of gay men facing outright sexual harassment from straight women who sexually proposition them or aggressively try to turn them straight. It makes the intended safe space feel anxious and hostile.
So the debate internally is about whether to restrict entry.
Exactly. The sources cite international examples, noting that some Australian gay bars have legally banned women to protect their male clientele from harassment. It underscores how critical the definition of the space is. If the purpose is a sanctuary for a marginalized minority, the influx of the majority can fundamentally undermine that purpose.
What's fascinating here, and what the sources stress as a critical loss, is the concept of negative equality that defined the classic Ni-chome bar.
This concept is essential to understanding the spiritual loss. In the 70s and 80s, when you entered a classic gay bar, the pressures of the outside world were supposed to be shed. Whether you were a CEO, a student, or an unemployed artist in that room, status was irrelevant.
As the source describes it, a homo is a homo.
Right. There was a profound negative equality rooted in shared marginalization. You could drop your daytime identity and just relax.
But with acceptance and the influx of the outside world, that sanctuary is leaking.
Precisely. Because society is more open and the bar is no longer a segregated, high-risk sanctuary, the outside world's status games are leaking back in. The sources describe the atmosphere as becoming sechitsurai.
A wonderful Japanese term.
It means roughly Depressing, difficult, disheartening. Societal class, hierarchy, professional status are being reintroduced into bar conversations, robbing the space of its most liberating feature.
It sounds like the financial and digital collapses didn't just hurt the bottom line, they killed the spirit of the space.
They absolutely did. They replaced liberating anonymity with competitive visibility. However, the community is not simply rolling over and accepting defeat. This knowledge of impending demise has spurred action.
We see a new grassroots movement focused on the physical survival of the neighborhood.
That's the hope for the future. Activities like the annual Rainbow Festival, which started in 2000, and volunteer cleanup groups like Ni-chome Umisakura are fostering new relationships between the long-term non-gay residents, the original townspeople, and the gay patrons and business owners.
They're finding common ground based on mutual urban vitality.
It's a pragmatic approach. The old residents are realizing that the vitality of the gay town is economically beneficial. This grassroots effort aims to achieve a new, resilient form of diversity and inclusion by finding common ground, rather than solely relying on political opposition.
The history of Nichune, stretching back 300 years, has always been defined by its unique capacity for mongrelization, its ability to absorb different, often controversial elements. That spirit is being tested now by forces more powerful and invisible than ever before.
Digital technology and luxury real estate.
So if we look at the timeline of Shinjuku Ni-chome, it's a 300-year story of profound transformation driven entirely by shifting human desire. It started as an official post station driven by commerce and the regulated heterosexual desire of travelers.
It survived abolition and became a formal licensed pleasure quarter fueled by the modern salaryman.
And then in the vacuum created by the state suppression of that pleasure district, it morphed almost overnight into a global hub driven by homosexual desire.
Its sheer survival and its current unparalleled concentration depended on two things: the unique tolerance and mongrelization inherent to Shinjuku, and the explosive, determined sexual energy of a marginalized group determined to find a physical space.
That cultural force overcame fires, earthquakes, legal bans, and social taboos.
But today, the challenges are invisible. Soaring property values and technology that removes the need for physical space. The function of meeting has moved to the phone. The physical necessity that underwrote the entire community is eroding.
And the sources force us to ask, will that explosive energy that created the world's largest gay town be able to resist the combined pressures of digital migration and luxury real estate in the 2020s?
The physical fate of the street is tied to property values, but its spiritual fate is tied to technology.
It seems like Ni-chome is facing the ultimate paradox of its own success. Acceptance diminishes the need for the shelter. The community is safer and more visible than ever, but the bars are emptier and the rents are higher.
Indeed, the history of Ni-chome teaches us that the dedicated physical space for a marginalized group tends to fade as society becomes more accepting and digital.
So, here's a provocative thought for you to mull over as you reflect on this incredible history. If the original driving need for a physical safe space, the need for secrecy, anonymity, and sanctuary disappears entirely, what becomes the new essential function of a place like Shinjuku Ni-chome? Does it become a heritage district, a political monument? Or will it find a new, entirely different third form of desire to sustain its unique cultural life?